Salam alaikum, everyone. We're here reporting live from Egypt for part 3, Thalatha, of the historic interview with Dr. Zahi Hawass on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. And I have my wonderful husband here, Geoffrey Drumm from the land of Chem.
Hello.
Let's do it again. That was fun. Welcome back. I'm Lex Levy, and this is Ancient Odysseys.
Yeah, so part 3. They were just finishing with the discussion on the construction of the Sphinx, and Hawass was clarifying why the head of the Sphinx shows less erosion than the body of the Sphinx, which has to do with the layering of the geological strata on the Giza plateau, with the head being excavated from the Mokattam Formation, which is the highest quality limestone that's at the top of the plateau, and the lower body of the Sphinx being excavated from lower quality stones, which is why they had to case the bedrock body of the Sphinx with limestone masonry blocks instead of carving the entire thing from this bedrock formation. So they took a little restroom break, and we got about 30 minutes left in the interview. At this point, I think they're both exhausted. You can tell clearly that both of them are over the interview process. Joe is frustrated. Old Zahi Hawass isn't having a fantastic time either. So we'll play this in the background, watch, and we'll be back with our next commentary at the appropriate time.
Okay, this is surprising. Dr. Zahi Hawass doesn't know about Zep Tepe or the King's List in Abydos.
Yeah, so again, I don't know if this is just something getting lost in translation, but Zep Tepe is like the primordial time of the gods, the first time, the era of creation that was sort of the birthplace of the mythological deities, and again, it's the oldest era of mythological Egypt, dating back very, very far. I couldn't tell you the exact time frame on that, but Hawass just said he doesn't know what it is. And he also said he wasn't aware of the King's List, which is in one of the walls in the Seti I temple in Abydos. As you're going out toward the Osireion, there's a King's List that goes back to Narmer and Menes. Now, Joe says that it goes back 30,000 years. I can't say that that's accurate, because it literally starts with Pharaoh 1, Menes or Narmer, and goes all the way through Seti. I can't corroborate that actually going back to 30,000 years. I'm not sure where that information comes from. That King's List in the Seti I temple, it goes back to Narmer, but that's the beginning of it. It doesn't go back any further than that. So I'm not sure where that 30,000 year date comes from.
Okay, I think Dr. Zahi Hawass is saying he's not aware of a 30,000-year-old King's List. He did mention he knows of a list that goes back to Dynasty 5, but we know from the King's List in the Temple of Seti the First in Abydos, it goes back to Narmer, Dynasty 1.
Yeah, again, I think this is kind of a one of those things that's lost in translation. He's also kind of saying he's never heard of the Zep Tepe, which that's a little bit odd for him to say that he's never heard of that. But Joe is pushing this question about the 30,000 year dating, which Hawass is saying he's never heard of that because there is no King's List in Egypt that we're aware of that has dating back to 30,000 years. That I don't think that actually exists.
Okay, I think Joe is referring to the Turin King's List. In this list, it has recorded the gods and quote-unquote mythological kings prior to Dynasty 1. It is badly damaged, and it is believed that there were originally 223 names of kings in the document, of which only 126 have survived.
Man, it's just not looking good at this point. I mean, so the interview has gotten progressively worse. The longer it goes on and the more Joe presses him with questions, the more frustrated, flustered. He's agitated. Zahi Hawass, because again, he's not used to being questioned. He is the authority not to be questioned, period. Um, so Rogan is pulling up information explaining the mythology of the Zep Tepi, the first time, the birth of civilizations, the time when gods lived on the earth. And Hawass is saying he's never heard of that before, which I think it's just frustration. And at this point, he's sort of shutting down and he's not assimilating the questioning, because whatever Joe is going to say at this point, he's going to argue against it. So it's just, this whole thing has been a progressively deteriorating representative of, the state of Egyptology. It's not looking good. It's just rough. Yeah. So Hawass just did a very, those people, Yanni, because Yanni is like, when people are getting frustrated, they're like, it means I mean. He's like, oh, Yanni, it's a very, very Egyptian phrase that just kind of slipped out, and he's getting really frustrated. Joe is trying to identify the source of the myth of Zep Tepi, which if you talk to, again, Hawass is just shut down at this point, and he's not hearing what Joe is actually asking. That being said, so when you're communicating with somebody from another country that speaks another language, and English is their second language, you have to be very slow and deliberate and make sure. So Zep Tepi, Hawass maybe not hearing that correctly.
Yeah, it could
So,
be called something different.
yeah, or there's a term that they use in Egypt where this is an anglicized or American term. We call it Zep Tepi, but they might call it something different. All the Egyptologists that I've spoken with all know of this term Zep Tepi, but again, I don't think Hawass is hearing what Joe is asking, and sometimes Joe is using technical nomenclature that just isn't registering. So, but again, at this point, they're both over it, and you can tell Joe is like getting extremely exhausted. And at this point, it's already come out where Rogan made a public statement that it was probably his worst interview
Oh,
ever,
no.
which it's not a. They should stop putting this guy on podcasts. It's not a good look for Egyptology and the academic perspective of classical dynastic Egyptian history. It's not a good look.
I'm so glad they're having these conversations. Though.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly good to have someone on the podcast to discuss both sides of the argument for ancient civilization, something that may have predated dynastic Egypt, the construction of the pyramids, all of these mysteries. And there certainly are unanswered questions about what has happened in history in Egypt. But get somebody younger. No offense to the older generation, but, you know,
They have the experience.
he has the experience, but he's also no longer able to effectively communicate, because again, he's an old man. He's flustered. He's not hearing what Joe is saying. He's not listening to what Joe is saying. And he is the type of person, again, a lot of people don't like Zahi Hawass, and it's mostly because of his attitude. And you can see now this very much the problem with the conversation is he's getting very combative with Joe, and he doesn't want to hear about the theory. He's not interested. He's never heard of it. End of story. Don't ask me any more questions. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know about it. I'm the authority. Nobody's going to ask me any questions. Nobody out there knows better than me. And that's to be the emissary for a certain institution. You have to have at least some modicum of professionalism and to be open to different suggestions and to be able to articulate your objections when you disagree with something. You can't just say, no, I've never heard about it, I'm the authority, so no, it didn't happen. You have to be able to provide some explanation for why your objection exists. Again, I'm still surprised he doesn't recognize the term Zep Tepi. Again, he may not be hearing it correctly at this point.
Well said, babe.
Okay, so now they're getting into the argument about the dating and carbon 14, and Hawass is saying he doesn't believe in carbon 14 dating because it doesn't give accurate dates, which I'm imagining because if they actually tested some of this stuff, it gives dates that are way older than what they want it to be. So now he's saying what they do is absolute dating, is that when you date a site, so he's given the example of a cemetery, you excavate the cemetery, there's a name of a king and a date for the king. So that's it. Whatever's on the written on the wall of the cemetery, that's the date. And then he's also going into another huge problem in archaeology, which is something called comparative dating, where if you have two different sites, for example, burial A and burial B, you find artifacts in burial A, some vases, for example, that have a certain style on them, right? Or an artistic style or glyphs of a certain, certain style, and then you compare those to the glyphs and the styles of artifacts found in Tomb B. And if they have the same style, it means they are comparatively from the same date range. And they use this technique across the board in archaeology, which is, in my opinion, it's not accurate at all because styles can be inherited from earlier generations. There's a lot of problems with comparative dating. So again, it's not not a very favorable representation. He's basically denying carbon 14 dating, which, granted, there are tons of problems with carbon 14 dating, and it's certainly not the most accurate. And I don't necessarily believe in the dates that are given by carbon 14 dating either, but it's funny to hear this at this point. So that discussion on the carbon 14 dating, and it didn't go anywhere because Hawass is just not having the argument about carbon 14 dating. He said they don't use it. It doesn't work in Egypt, which we do know for sure that carbon dating has been used in various structures. He's saying they use absolute dating based on the hieroglyphs, the names. So if they find a city and there's, which one did he say?
The Golden City in Luxor?
Yeah, Golden City in Luxor, Amenhotep III. So if there's cartouches of Amenhotep III, it dates to Amenhotep's reign. But the question is, how do you know exactly what time that is unless you have some sort of dating method like carbon 14? That line of questioning didn't go anywhere. Hawass transitioned into a story about the restoration of the Sphinx, and now he's going to go tell this other, most likely, inconclusive story that's not going to go anywhere. So he's telling about we'll see what he says about the Sphinx, but he was saying that there was like a botched restoration, modern restoration, where a team came in and replaced all the ancient blocks with modern blocks. And remember that when you go to the Sphinx today, what you see is most like, well, it's not most likely, it is almost completely restoration. None of it's original. It's either Greek and Roman restoration or modern restoration.
But he intervened because they were using cement, which ruined it,
Right.
and he wanted mortar to be used, which is period correct.
Yeah, so my opinion, you should just leave it the way it is. All right, so about a 10-minute long story of Tutmosis IV uncovering the Sphinx, and so Hawass had made a point that there were no ancient restorations on any of the structures or sites, but then he goes and tells a story of ancient restorations happening at the Sphinx, and it was, it's sort of a diversionary topic where Hawass, if he's getting frustrated with the line of questioning, he's like, let me tell you this story, and then tells this long story to kind of take the conversation in another direction, which is exactly what just happened. So he took the discussion away from the carbon 14. Let me tell you this story. Let me tell you something. This a story about the Sphinx. So now they're off in the other way. But then Joe is now coming back and saying, so what do you think the argument is? And I can already see where this is going to go. Joe's like, okay, so now what do you think about what arguments are there that push the dating of the pyramids back? And we're awaiting to hear Hawass's response.
You're very good with the psychology of this interview. I
Well,
think that's fascinating too.
Well, so I look at it from, I'm not trying to defend Zahi Hawass because he's made some just blatant errors, but I can also see, from a humanitarian perspective, I like to look at how Joe is handling the interview and also how Hawass is handling the interview. And again, this is why I was making the statement about, you don't let an old man go and be the representative for your institution, right? You get the most young, virile, polite, patient, articulate, all of these aspects that make a good representative for something. You send that person out, not somebody who's at the tail end of their career, who's known for being argumentative and, combative and all of these personality traits that have definitely come out thus far in the interview. And the only reason Hawass is doing this, he's retired now, and he's going on a book tour to sell his books. And, he's making the rounds on all the, I guarantee, well, I know for sure you're going to see him on another podcast that people watch. And I would almost bet that by the time, I don't think that second one's going to come out. We know that, so he's already announced it publicly, so I'm not like putting out any secrets here. Matt Beall on Limitless Podcast. I don't know how to pronounce your name, Matt. Not that you were going to watch this, but Matt Ball and Matt Beall, Limitless Podcast, was going to have Hawass on. His handler has already said, don't have your antiquities out in the studio because Ball has this big collection of Egyptian vases.
I was
He's
wondering how that was going to play out.
oh yeah, no, it wouldn't go over well if he has all these antiquities that were obtained. I'm not saying he got them illegally, but I don't know how he got these things, and I'm sure it would be a contentious argument having Zahi. But I would imagine that by the time that interview is supposed to happen, there's no way that's actually going to go through because Hawass isn't going to want to do any more interviews, and they would have learned enough because there's been massive fallout across the board from this interview, and it's actually mainly people from the academic archaeological perspective that are super disappointed with this, the representation by Hawass for the community of Egyptology, because it's a very poor representation. And again, if you're sending an expert out, you send an expert who's able to provide answers and to be able to respond to questions without taking it personally, but to, again, if you're going to have a discussion with somebody, you should be able to entertain both sides of the story and will it really represent your point well. If you object to something, you should be able to provide scientific evidence. And basically, Hawass's only argument at this point is like, no, because I'm the guy and I say no, therefore no, which is not a good argument. All right, so now they're on to the conversation about, okay, so Joe was saying, what is the argument for advanced ancient civilizations? Hawass says there is no argument. Well, Joe says, hey, well, what about Gobekli Tepe? The discovery of Gobekli Tepe changed the narrative because there isn't supposed to be a civilization that could build these things during this time frame, 12,000 years ago, circa 10,000 BC. They discover Gobekli Tepe. Hawass says, oh, I never heard of this. Because again, I think he's not hearing him. And he said, clarifies, oh, it's in Turkey. So, Hawass is going to say, just because they discover something in Turkey doesn't mean it has anything to do with Egypt. But now they're going into the discussion about the discovery of Gobekli Tepe as being evidence for an more ancient civilization that had the capability of building sophisticated structures.
All right. Joe's questioning how we went from 0 to pyramids, which I think would make a great shirt. And now Dr. Zahi Hawass is talking about the evolution from the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, but what came before?
Right. So the discussion about Gobekli Tepe didn't go anywhere. Hawass sort of deferred the line of questioning and said, but we're not talking about Turkey. We're talking about Egypt. So then, Rogan says, how did we, again, like Alexis just said, how do we get from 0 to pyramids? And now Hawass is regurgitating the conventional timeline from the pre-dynastic Neolithic period, hunter-gatherers, etc., that transitioned into agricultural area, which then they have the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt by Narmer, circa 3000 BC, Dynasty 0, building mud brick tombs, and he's going to continue with the discussion about how the development of the pyramid structures. And here, just Joe made a really good point that I've sort of alluded to before, is that, a lot of people don't realize how much a civilization can advance in a very short amount of time. And if you take our modern civilization, for example, if you look back at the 1800s, look at where our civilization was then and where it is now in a very, very short amount of time. And the dynastic Egyptian civilization is like 3,000 years old. So from 3000 BC to 2000 BC, there could have been tremendous developments in science and technology and construction and all of these things. And people often underestimate the capabilities of ancient humans. Ancient humans were as intelligent and capable as we are today of making scientific technological advancement. Not to mention, of course, that I think everybody that's watching this believes that the civilization dates back much further than that. So what we have in Egypt is the pinnacle execution of the accumulation of knowledge over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And you can do a lot in that time frame, even in much shorter time frames, where again, in my opinion, the pyramid building technology is the pinnacle representation of that knowledge here on the planet, where the civilization was doing the best quality work that it could have done based on the accumulation of knowledge over a very long time period.
Now Dr. Zahi is talking about the major discovery he and his team have made in Saqqara, finding statues of Pharaoh Zoser, and his wives and children. But why didn't she get a pyramid?
Saying how they these new discoveries in Saqqara were made underneath houses that were built around the archaeological site there, and it's a huge area in Saqqara where there's a number of different structures, and there are homes, that were built during the archaeological excavations for the archaeologists and the researchers that were living at the site, the excavators, etc. There's one in particular, this beautiful house above the Bubastion, which last time we were there, we were saying, why don't they excavate underneath this thing and what's it covering up? But Hawass just basically said that's exactly what they found, is by demolishing and excavating underneath some of the houses that were literally built on top of, important sites. There's a lot more to be found underground, and unfortunately, modern houses and other structures are built directly on top of these things. All right, so I knew this part was coming too, and this has been a topic of huge response within the community. So now he's talking about the development of the pyramid design coming from Imhotep. The original configuration for the step pyramid was a single level mastaba. They added more mastabas on top of it to create this stepped pyramid. But then Joe asks him, what's the dating of the step pyramid? And then Hawass says it's 700 years older than the Great Pyramid, which, where does that number come from? Okay, so third dynasty. Djoser is in the third dynasty. Then you go to fourth dynasty, and you have Seneferu, Khufu, Khafra, Menkaura. And then you go to the fifth dynasty, and then you have Sahore, Nefertare, Nayusere, the pyramids of Abu Sir. So from the third dynasty to the fourth dynasty, I believe is approximately 100 years in terms of the conventional timeline, not 700 years from Djoser to Khufu. And I'm going to pause real quick because I want to confirm that. It's a couple generations of time. I believe it's approximately 100 years between the time of Djoser until the time of Khufu. And I'll confirm that because I want to make sure that I get this right. But Hawass just said it's 700 years, which is, where the hell is he getting 700 years from? Huh. Yeah, I was actually right. And my knowledge of the chronology of conventional dynastic Egypt was actually right. So Djoser is approximately 2600 BC, so 2630 to 2611 BC. Khufu is 2551 to 2528. So 100 years between the construction of the step pyramid, according to the conventional timeline, 100 years between Djoser and Khufu, the step pyramid and the Great Pyramid. Hawass just said it's 700 years, which is a huge. Again, is he just old and tired and confused at this point and made an error? So this is another good point. When you're on a podcast and you're under the bullseye, you make mistakes. You don't always say things perfectly. And people have gotten a lot of criticism, myself included, for things that I've said on podcasts. And sometimes you make mistakes and people are human. And, he may just be under the pressure and, had made a simple mistake and wasn't thinking correctly. So again, I don't know exactly where that comes from, but you can't always like be really, really critical of people for things they say in podcasts, because again, we're all humans. We all make mistakes, and there's a lot of pressure at this point. It's been a 2-hour interview. They're both exhausted, and again, I'm not sure where that. So to clarify, 100 years, according to the conventional accepted timeline, between the construction of the Step Pyramid and the construction of the Great Pyramid, Djoser to Khufu. So now he's going to go talk about how Seneferu took the evolution of pyramid design to the next level, because there is a huge jump in construction technology between the Step Pyramid of Djoser, that was supposedly designed by the architect Imhotep, and the constructions by Seneferu moved more stone than any other pharaoh in Egypt.
How many pyramids?
The Pyramid of Maidum, the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, possibly 7 satellite pyramids, one of them that's located on Elephantine Island. It also may be dated to Huni. So Huni is the last pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty, and Seneferu was the first pharaoh of the 4th. There. That's right.
You're good at this.
Pretty good. Yeah, so Huni, they have 7 mysterious pyramids located all throughout Egypt. One of them is on Elephantine Island. There's no internal chambers. There is no dating. It's just a mass pyramid structure. So they know for sure that these things are not burials. So what exactly are these things? They're either attributed to, specifically referencing the one on Elephantine Island, it's either attributed to Huni, the last pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty, or Seneferu. So Seneferu may have built all 7 of these mysterious smaller cult pyramids, and then at least 1, 2, 3, I think I said a dozen last time, which is pretty close, because the Bent Pyramid also has a satellite pyramid. And does Maidum have a satellite pyramid?
Not that I recall.
I don't know if
it's
I don't
still
know if
standing.
Maidum, but I always count satellite pyramids are pyramids. So there's 3 in Dashur, 4 the Pyramid of Maidum, so 11 if you count those 7. So old Seneferu built 11 pyramids, all for his burial. Again, another architectural error. He was saying that they started the Pyramid of Maidum, but some reason left it unfinished. That's not true. Maidum was finished, and then there was a catastrophic collapse. Well, I will say the inside was not finished. So I don't know whether he's referencing the inside or the outside,
That's fair.
because the inside chambers were not finished completely, because the outside fell down. If you look at the Pyramid of Maidum, it has a stepped core, an elongated stepped core, it's spectacular to see this thing in person. It's huge. But then all of the casing stones on the outside have fallen off in a catastrophic collapse, and they're all around the base of the structure. So the inside project was abandoned. So technically, he is right that it was left unfinished, but there's a reason for that, and I don't think he elaborates any further about that. So Hawass, again, he's describing the evolution of pyramid building and the massive leaps that were undertaken by the pharaoh Seneferu in the construction of the pyramids in Dashur. He made a nice point that nobody ever goes to Dashur, which is a tragic truth about tourism in Egypt, that people either go to Saqqara or they go to Giza. They never go to Dashur. And 2 of the most spectacular pyramids that were ever constructed are in Dashur, the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid. And now he's saying that the transition between the 4th dynasty to Seneferu to Giza, that there was a decrease in the quality of stone. So they made a decree on limitations of stone, and that is what led to the development of the decoration of pyramids and tombs. That instead of using high quality stone, making huge structures, they then decided to make smaller stuff but it was decorated. I don't buy that. So the pyramids in Dashur have absolutely zero adornment on the inside. Pyramids of Giza have absolutely zero adornment on the inside. It's a huge contrast between structures that are absolutely pharaonic burial structures, which are elaborately decorated and don't have a level of engineering that is indicative of function that's other than burial, right? Burial structures are very simple. It's just a hole in the ground. They put a bunch of murals and stuff all over the wall, and that's all it is. The structures in Dashur are indicative of engineering that is intended to elicit a function, which is very, very different. So again, that's his explanation for, I guess, why the pyramids of Dashur and Giza aren't decorated, is because they were using high quality stone, but now that they were using inferior quality stone as the dynasties moved down the timeline, they started to decorate it instead.
I've never heard that one.
I've never. That's new, and I don't buy that. All right, so they're basically kind of wrapping up the interview. Hawass is encouraging him and trying to coordinate his visit to Egypt, which I hope that Joe goes independently and doesn't get sucked into the propaganda campaign that Hawass is now describing that he conducted for the Mr. Beast site visit, because he literally said, I wanted to convince the young people that the pyramids weren't built by aliens. So again, Joe doesn't necessarily believe that they were built by aliens. I don't think they were built by aliens either. I think, you're severely underestimating the capability of our ancient human ancestors by saying that they were built by extraterrestrials. So that being said, they had a very propaganda-filled itinerary, and Mr. Beast was just dragged along the whole thing. If any of you guys watched that, it was difficult. It's basically exactly like this interview, but on site in Egypt. And I hope Joe doesn't agree to that, because it's not what he wants to see. And there's a lot of stuff that would get missed in that process. So we'll watch the end of it now.
All right. So they wrapped up the interview, and they seem to make peace and smooth things over a bit.
Yeah.
Now they're making plans for Joe to go to Egypt